What's up, everybody? Today we're going to be ranking dead stand-up comedians, so let's go ahead and start with Mitch Hedberg. Mitch Hedberg is one of my favorite comedians. I love the guy. His one-liner style of comedy is always so addicting and fun to watch. It's really interesting because he has like this shower thought style of thinking that he brings to his comedy, and then the punchlines are always unique and fun. And I really think that Mitch Hedberg would have been one of the greatest if he would have lived a little bit longer and gotten to advance his delivery and his comedy style even more. I think if Mitch would have lived through this era of, TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts, his style of comedy was really perfect for that because it was just a quick setup and a really good punchline, sometimes with a couple tags or just one tag. And, people would have really become addicted to this style. It's just really fun to watch. He's such a likable guy with such an easygoing and carefree delivery. He's just so impossible to dislike while he's up there. I do think that he died a little too soon for me to really consider him in the GOAT tier, but I would say that for the time and for what he did in his time alive, Mitch Hedberg deserves pretty damn good, and a really solid pretty damn good at that. So I'm going to put him right here. Moving on, we have Charlie Murphy. I think is hilarious in his voice acting and in the Chappelle Show. I really love Charlie Murphy. I love Eddie. And there's actually a clip from Eddie's Delirious where somebody shouts out in the middle of his set to do Mr. Rob, which is a character from SNL, and somebody yells out loud, "Shut up, bitch," and basically responds to her on Eddie's behalf. And a lot of people didn't know at first. That's actually Charlie Murphy in that clip. You can find it. It's really funny. And Eddie starts laughing immediately because he knows it's Charlie, and it's just a really cool moment to see. But in terms of his stand-up, I never really found myself watching a bunch of his stand-up. I didn't love it a lot. As much as I love Charlie and respect him as a comedian, I just really never got into his stand-up that deeply, Everybody's got their different things. I'm going to put him in the fine category. I think he was a good comic. Not every comedian you're going to watch, you're just going to want to go back and watch more of their stand-up. There's going to be a few comedians on this list you guys are probably going to be surprised by where I rank them. So if you disagree with that, you could just let me know in the comments. Moving on, we have Rodney Dangerfield. Once again, similar to Mitch, he has just such a ruthless, relentless one-liner style of comedy where it's just one joke after the other. It's just gut-busting, side-splitting, making you laugh nonstop. I really love Rodney. And even though he did a bunch of one-liners similar to Mitch, he never really got boring or stale with it. He found a way to keep it entertaining for an entire hour. He was always making it funny. And he always had the same premise of, "Oh, I get no respect around here. No respect. Nobody respects me." It's just really funny stuff, man. I really loved what Rodney did. And I think the fact that he had a little bit of bitterness for how late in his career he made it and became famous, I think that kind of bled into his act a little, and it just made it even funnier and made him care less. And everybody loved Rodney. Just relentlessly funny. I'm going to put Rodney Dangerfield in the GOAT tier. Norm Macdonald actually said that Rodney, in his opinion, is one of the funniest comedians to ever live. If me loving Rodney wasn't enough, Norm praising him and giving him such high regard is enough for me to realize that Rodney was a special comedian. All the praise to Rodney Dangerfield. That's why I put him up here in the GOAT tier. Moving on, we have Lenny Bruce. Now, I don't think it's controversial to say Lenny Bruce is easily one of the most influential comedians. Some people call him the grandfather of stand-up comedy. This guy crawled so that George Carlin and Richard Pryor could walk. And Lenny was really like the splitting of the atom in regards of the counterculture movement and how comedy kind of seeped into that. Back in the day when stand-up was kind of just like its own shitty little art form that not a lot of people cared about, Lenny Bruce was routinely going on stage and doing jokes that a lot of people found incredibly offensive. So offensive, in fact, that he was violating obscenity laws and actually arrested multiple times on stage for doing so. I don't know how many times off my head, but the dude got arrested for doing stand-up and he refused to change his act. I can't praise Lenny enough for what he did for comedy, but that being said, his stand-up never really made me laugh, and I know I'm going to get some flack for this, but I'm going to put Lenny Bruce in not for me. He's really I never found him funny. I've watched a lot of his older stuff, and I just really never got into it. But like I said, I appreciate what he did for the art form, and I think it's incredibly important because without Lenny Bruce, we might not have gotten some of the other great comedians we're going to talk about on this list. So all the respect in the world to Lenny Bruce. I just never really found his comedy funny. That's why I put him in not for me. Moving on, we have Patrice O'Neal, and I don't want this to turn into a glazing fest, but if you guys know this channel, you know Patrice O'Neal is my second favorite comedian of all time. I'll go ahead and just put him up here in GOAT tier. One of the reasons I love Patrice is he was just so relentlessly honest and consistently shared his lens of the world and how he saw it. Even when he knew people were going to dislike him and come at him for the way that he saw it, under no circumstances did he change who he was or mold his personality for somebody else. As corny as it sounds, he said it how it was. And Louis C.K. praised Patrice for saying that Patrice holds a spot in comedy that nobody else will ever touch. And I really believe that to be the truth. Whether it was being misogynistic or being racist, no matter what it was, if Patrice saw it as funny, he was going to tell you how it was, whether you liked it or not. And he kind of perfected the strategy of when you're bombing, instead of changing your act to make people like you and to make them warm up to you, to actually go harder in what it is you're doing and continue at your crusade. He refused to let the audience put their foot on his neck even when he was having a rough set. And even at one point when he was blacklisted from a lot of American comedy clubs and actually had to move to Europe, he eventually made his way back to the States and he was loved. And right before he died, everyone was coming to understand how much of a fucking comedic genius he was. And unfortunately, he died from diabetes, but it doesn't change the fact that he really was a special comedian. And Norm Macdonald even went on the air to say that Patrice is his favorite comedian. The fact that Norm praised him and every other comedian praises him, it really just speaks volume as to how good the guy was. So that's why I put Patrice in GOAT tier. Next comedian we have is Ralphie May. Ralphie May, similar to Mitch Hedberg, died really young, and I don't think that he was at his full potential. I really think he could have gotten even funnier than he already was. You know, there's that Too Big to Ignore. He had a great masterclass that was recorded at the Comedy Store. It's like 3 hours long where he talks about what it takes to be successful as a comedian. Ralphie really understood what it took to be successful as a comedian. And he even discussed like one of the strategies that helped him make $1 million in a single year of doing stand-up alone. Ralphie really just knew how to do comedy. And I think if he had more time, similar to several other comedians on the list, he would have actually been able to be in the GOAT conversation. But I'm going to put Ralphie May in the pretty damn good territory. I think that's where he deserves. You know, I think if he had lived a little longer, he could have been up here potentially, but sadly, his life was cut short because, you know, the dude loved to eat. While expanding his comedic arsenal, he also expanded his belly with a lot of whoppers, so unfortunately, it took a toll on his health, and the dude passed away early. But that being said, I have so much respect for Ralphie May, and rest in peace, big fella. Next comedian we have is Bill Hicks. I think Bill Hicks is extremely funny. I think he gets hate from some people. Like, I think Norm actually has said before that he doesn't like Bill Hicks and called him a fraud. I actually disagree with Norm on that. I really liked Bill Hicks. He has one of my favorite jokes ever, which was he was talking about the JFK assassination, and he's like, in Dallas, there's a room called the Assassination Room, and it's historically very accurate because Oswald's not in it. It's one of my favorite jokes I've ever heard, and it lives in my head rent-free. But Bill Hicks was somebody that was so good at stand-up so early on, and he died so young, that I think he could have really, really been in the GOAT tier. Some people consider him GOAT tier, but I think if he had a little bit more time to develop and mature as a comedian, we could have really, really seen him take it to the next level. So I'm going to put him in the pretty damn good tier. All in all, I really love Bill Hicks. There's clips of him killing and doing really well when he was just like 18 or 19 years old. I think there's a stand-up clip of him at his high school graduation just doing really well and so comfortable on stage so young. And I'm like, man, if this guy would have had 20 years under his belt or 30 years, he could have really been like another George Carlin or Richard Pryor. So all the respect and love in the world for Bill Hicks. Now, the next comedian we have is Don Rickles. I love Don Rickles. I think his roasting was some of the goofiest and most unique types of roasting. He wasn't just trying to be mean all the time. Sometimes he would just say like a silly thing that really made no sense at all. You know, he would do it and have that goofy smile on his face, and it just really made all of his roasts super fun to watch. His stand-up by itself I liked, but I never really was addicted to it the way I was like some of the other comedians up here. I would put him in the solid category. You know, he was a great comic. He didn't stand out to me a lot for his stand-up by itself, but I really loved what he did for the roasting category of comedy. I really enjoyed that. I know some of you guys are going to be mad at me because I'm ranking some of the older guys lower than you would like me to, but you know, this is my list and I'm a younger guy, so just understand where I'm coming from. That's why I put Don Rickles in the solid category. And if you have a favorite roast joke of his that you really like, please leave it in a comment down below and let me know, because I love reading his comments. You know, anytime Norm would quote something Don would say, it was awesome. Moving on, we have Andy Kaufman. Now, Andy Kaufman was another artist who was super pivotal for stand-up and for kind of anti-comedy as a genre. I really liked what he stood for and what he did and how he never really adhered to the traditional standards of comedy and entertainment. He did his own thing. He's went on the record before saying he's not a comic. He's never told a joke. He's never set any jokes up or anything like that. And for that reason, I've never gone back and watched any of his late night shows, really. That's why I'm going to put him in not for me, because like I said, he's very influential, but in terms of being a stand-up comic and being funny, it wasn't really for me. I don't ever find myself going back to watch anything he did. I always appreciated his like trolling sort of nature and good-hearted fun that he had with the audience. There's plenty of people on here who have a little bit of Andy Kaufman in them, so that's important. I just never found myself laughing, so that's why I put him, like Lenny Bruce, in the not for me category. Next comedian we have is Bob Hope. Now, Bob Hope is someone who, like Andy Kaufman or Lenny Bruce, is incredibly influential. A lot of comedians cite him as an influence. I've watched a couple of his bits, and I found myself exhaling a little bit of extra air out of my nose and appreciating him, but I think it was a generational thing. You know, I'm a younger guy. My sense of humor is a little weird. And I never really found myself going back and watching Bob Hope. I'm going to put him in fine. You know, I thought he was good comic. It just wasn't really for me. What he was doing as a comic, it was just, I think, for a different generation of people. Obviously, there's a generational gap here, but that's not to say he's a bad comic. He's not. He's funny to a certain demographic of people. I just don't think it was me, man. So I wanted to be charitable by putting him in the fine category. But yeah, Bob Hope just never really stood out to me, never really made me laugh super duper hard. That's why I put him in the fine category. The next comedian we have is Johnny Carson, you know, one of the most famous hosts of The Tonight Show. This guy right here was ultimately what Joe Rogan is now. He was the gatekeeper for comedy. The Tonight Show is what everybody wanted to do. Everybody wanted a tight five so they could get on Carson, so they could get in front of the biggest set of eyes in America, which was this late night show that Johnny hosted. His stand-up and his wit wasn't really for my liking. He was kind of a straight arrow. He was a military guy. He was likable. He was a great Tonight Show host. I just never found myself laughing at a lot of what he had to say. But that being said, I think he was a great set of eyes as a gatekeeper for comedians who deserve to be at the next level and deserve that level of notoriety. Even though he held grudges against people like Joan Rivers and a few others for, you know, doing their own things and, you know, starting their own late show, I think Johnny did his job exceptionally well. And I think he was a better gatekeeper than the current gatekeepers that exist for comedy. Similar to Bob Hope, it never really stood out to me. I never really found myself laughing at what he did. And I think he was a better host of The Tonight Show than he was a stand-up comic. And that's why I'm putting him in the fine category. Obviously, there's people that love him, and he did the right things to entertain his audience consistently for many years. That's why I put Johnny Carson in the fine category. Next on the list, we have Gilbert Gottfried. Rest Gilbert, one of the funniest dudes ever. You know, in terms of stand-up, I appreciated what he did. You know, maybe not as much as like Greg Giraldo, Norm, or George Carlin, but anytime Gilbert Gottfried went on like the Norm Macdonald Live podcast, or he went on some type of show where he was just being himself and having a conversation, the dude was honestly probably one of the funniest people to do it. Like his 2 episodes on Norm Macdonald Live are 2 of the funniest things I've ever watched from start to finish. It's so fucking funny. And Norm Macdonald considers him to be one of his favorite comedians. I think Norm at one point said that when he started, Gilbert Gottfried was like his favorite comedian and his main influence. So I have a lot of love for Gilbert Gottfried and what he meant to other comedians. His stand-up to me is goofy because it's just like basic, simple jokes that wouldn't be funny if anybody else told them, but because it's Gilbert and he has the voice and he has the goofy delivery, it really is just funny no matter what. Maybe I'm a little biased on this one. I'm going to put Gilbert Gottfried in the pretty damn good territory just because I really loved when he did stand-up and he would just read shit with his voice. It was so funny. Losing him, Norm, and Bob Saget all so close to each other was such a tragedy for comedy. Next person we have on the list is Greg Giraldo, and I think Greg is one of the most clever joke writers, great crowd work, very witty off the spot, insanely good comedy writer. I really loved Greg Giraldo, and it's a damn shame that he died so young because I think, you know, similar to some of these other comedians, if he had a little bit more time to develop and reach his full potential, I think he could have been in the GOAT conversation. Some people consider him that way. I just think he needed a little bit more time, but watching him on any roast was so fun, just so quick-witted, so underrated. And the only reason he got into comedy was because he represented Jeff Ross, where Jeff Ross got arrested for something, and he was like a legal assistant at the time. I forgot what he did legally. I think he went to Harvard to study law. He was a fucking genius on paper, and he just got into comedy because he liked it, and he just found out that very quickly he was a virtuoso at it. Greg Giraldo had potential to be GOAT tier, but, you know, I'm going to put him in the pretty damn good territory. I almost guarantee if he was still alive, he'd be in the GOAT tier. I just wish he had a little bit more time and his life wasn't cut so short. The next comedian we have is Richard Jeni, and I think Richard is one of the best comedians to ever live, easily. Unfortunately, he took his own life, which is very sad because he was such a funny dude. I know he was kind of mean and rude to some of the people that were close to him. I think he had some mental issues that made him be a prick to people, and, you know, I don't think it was all just mean-spirited. I think he had some demons he was fighting through. In terms of comedy writing, I think Richard Jeni is easily top 10 of all time. I mean, his bit about breaking up is one of my favorite stand-up bits ever. He's just so good at wringing the towel and finding every drop of funniness and every possible angle he can attack with a bit. He was so likable on stage, and I think he's so underrated. I'm putting him in the GOAT tier. I think Richard Jeni was unique because in an era of like one-liner comedians like Stephen Wright and Rodney and all these guys, he would do the opposite. He would take a bit and just really, really squirt every last drop of funniness out of something. something, he wouldn't leave any stones unturned when talking about a bit. It didn't matter what it was. It might be an unpopular opinion, but that's why I put Richard Jeni up here. Next comedian we have is Richard Pryor. This is an easy one. Richard Pryor's going in the GOAT tier. He's one of the greatest of all time. Super funny, super likable. I mean, Jesus Christ, he came up in a time when it wasn't incredibly popular for a black comedian to be up there. I think he broke through in an era where it was really hard for black comedians to break through. You know, he has one of the highest grossing comedy specials of all time, Live at the Sunset Strip. He set himself on fire. Some people said he was never the same after that happened, and I mean, I could see why. It's a super traumatic event, but to say that Richard Pryor's any less than GOAT tier, I think is incredibly wrong. I think it's impossible to ignore what Richard Pryor did for the craft. He inspired the likes of Chappelle, Patrice, Eddie Murphy. Louis cites him as an influence. Norm cites him as an influence. This guy influenced fucking everybody, just like George Carlin. So that's why I'm putting him in the GOAT tier. And if you disagree with that, I don't know what to tell you. Next comedian we have on the list is Bob Saget. Now, Bob Saget was an incredibly unique stand-up comic. I actually got to see him a couple months before he died. He was at a club that I work here in Florida. Bob Saget did Full House. He was a great stand-up comic. And you know, despite having a super clean sitcom that was family-friendly, this dude would go out in the evenings and do stand-up and do some of the raunchiest, filthiest material, but he was fucking hilarious nonetheless, and a lot of people loved him. I wouldn't put him in the pretty damn good territory, but I would say he's a solid comic. You know, when I saw him, he was great. His stand-up impressed me, and I had never seen him do it at that point. I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't put him above any of these guys or at their level, but, you know, I really, really love Bob Saget, and I have a big respect for him. Norm praises him. A lot of people praise Bob Saget, and it's really sad that he died the way he did. That's why I put Bob Saget in the solid category. Rest in peace, brother. Next on the list, we have is Sam Kinison. You know, Sam has that clip of him at Dangerfield's. That was the first clip of his I was ever exposed to, and I really enjoyed it, but that was kind of the only clip of his I really had a deep appreciation for. I know he paved the way for a lot of stand-up comics, but I never really found myself super impressed with his stand-up despite his influence and how much of an impact he had on other comedians that came up in this era. Sam Kinison, I'm going to go ahead and put in the solid category as well. You know, I thought about putting him lower, but I really did like some of the clips I saw of him. It just never really stood out to me or made me laugh as much as some of the aforementioned people like Mitch Hedberg or Ralphie or Bill Hicks. I know you guys are going to disagree with some of these rankings because some of you are older than me and you had a deeper appreciation for guys like Sam Kinison or Don Rickles or these guys. And, you know, I'm going to blame the generational gap. This list could easily look completely different if somebody else did it, and I acknowledge that, but that's why I put Sam Kinison in the solid category. I hope you can respect where I'm coming from with that. Next comedian on the list we have is George Carlin. Now, George Carlin, I wouldn't say is the funniest to me. He has some specials that I absolutely love. Jammin' in New York is easily one of the greatest stand-up specials of all time. Back in Town is another one I really love. That's a special where he opens with a abortion joke where it's like most of the people who are against abortion, have you ever noticed, are people you wouldn't want to fuck in the first place? Just a fucking ballsy joke to open with. Even in, you know, your own people, that's just such a ruthless joke to open a special with. I have all the respect in the world for him. I know some people called George Carlin like a Redditor. I think that he was a really spectacular comedian for the time. This dude came up doing stand-up in an era where he wanted to be like Danny Kaye. He wanted to be clean, a clean-cut dude on TV initially, but when he got that and he was making a lot of money doing it, he realized it wasn't actually who he was. He still had this dissonance inside of him, and he pretty much went back on that path and started to embrace this counterculture dissonance, and he ended up becoming one of the faces of the counterculture movement in addition to Richard Pryor and Lenny Bruce in a time when stand-up comedy wasn't really appreciated the way it is now. Like, a lot of people love George Carlin. Obviously, there's that famous story of him and Lenny Bruce getting arrested and taken to jail in the same cop car. I'll put the video up here in the top right so you can watch that if you'd like to, but that's why I put George Carlin up here. Next on the list we have is Robin Williams. Now, I love Robin Williams as an actor and as a comedian. I would say that I loved him more as an actor. Good Will Hunting, Dead Poet Society, you know, just about any movie you could name that he was in. He was great in. He was a beacon of positivity in the world of entertainment. As for his stand-up comedy, I think his improv riffing was some of the best there ever was. You know, in a world full of crowd work, he would have really, really stood head and shoulders above everybody if he was still doing it, just because of how funny he was off rip and, you know, off the top of his head. That being said, One of the reasons that's keeping me from putting him in pretty damn good or GOAT tier was, the joke theft. David Brennan accused him of stealing jokes. I think it was either Paul Mooney or somebody else or maybe it was John Witherspoon who said that he stole jokes and pretty much all but confirmed it. And also there were people that said that when he would accuse them of stealing his joke, he would have his manager write them a check for like $500 or something. And this was back when he was at the Comedy Store and all this stuff. So I'm going to put him in the solid tier because he was a great comic, great comedic improv, great comedic actor. But, the joke theft stuff is probably going to keep me from putting him up here. And that's why I put him in the solid category. And last, but certainly not least, we have my favorite comedian of all time, Norm Macdonald. You knew this was coming. He's going in GOAT tier. He's going at the top. I think he's the greatest comedian of all time, easily. Just a spectacular mind. There's so many funny stories of Norm Macdonald doing hilarious things, whether it was misdirecting people on Conan with the moth joke, telling, a basic one-liner, stretching it into a 3 or 4 minute bit, him getting kicked out of Iowa for being told to be clean and then going up and just walking the entire audience. As fucked up as that is, to sabotage a show like that, there's a dark part of me that laughs at that because it was Norm Macdonald doing it and he knew what he was doing. So I love Norm, and just about every single comedian you could think of has praised Norm Macdonald. That's why I put him at the top, not only for how much I love the guy, but just for how influential he was, how unique he was, and also similar to Patrice, he did what he felt was right even when he knew it was going to lose him an opportunity. He always spoke his mind, and even if he got softer in his older age, fuck man, I love Norm Macdonald. What do you guys think about the tier list? I know the GOAT tier list is a little heavy. We have 6 comedians up here and a couple other ones, but I mean we did pick 20 dead comedians, a lot of them who are very famous and legendary for reasons that are very obvious. But what do you guys think of the list? Do you think I put too many people up here? Do you think some people were lower that should have been higher? Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. The last video I put out on Shane Gillis, thank you so much for all the support on that video. I really appreciate it. Make sure to leave a thumbs up if you guys like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. That's all I got for you guys today. I love you, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.